Good to go.
Well, good evening, everybody. I was asked to do a reflection on the covenant theology of hope in light of our design. And many of you know I've served the church in many capacities, moderator, boards, but I thought my best conversation tonight would talk as a local pastor, how the covenant, as I viewed it, impacted my ministry at Loudon Christian Church for 39 years. My disclaimer is that I was not born, I'm not a generational disciple. I came to the church in 1975, served with Alvin Jackson as a youth pastor and then as associate for a year. Alvin resigned, I became pastor in 1977, September 77. As I got to know the congregation and got to know the people, I discovered that based on what I had been reading and been told to read and the policy of the Christian church, that I was in conflict, or better, they were in conflict with me. They were a traditional disciple church, but what I had read and what they were telling me wasn't quite evening out. So I decided to meet with the elders and say, look, why don't we together read certain information, let us study together the Christian church as I'm being asked to do, so that we're on the same plane, we're working at this thing together. So I had, in our regular monthly elder meetings, I stumbled upon what was called the preamble. I had never heard of that. I read the preamble, ended up reading the entire design. At that time, it was the provisional design, but when I saw it, and then it became the design. But the preamble caught me, and especially the line where it talks about the fact that in God's covenant of love, we are bound to one another. That made a lot of sense to me. So I talked with the elders, I said, you know, I think this is the kind of church we're supposed to be. And how can we incorporate this in the full life of the church? So we talked about it, so I asked, could I use this in board meetings as a way of talking to the board? So we did the preamble with the board. I did it in elders and deacons meetings. I kept playing around with this thing because it made sense. I said, gosh, I think we might have a church that works together, passing people, if this is what makes us work together. So that went well, but that was a small sampling of the congregation. So I said, how can we use this so that everybody gets it? So we used to do a litany every Sunday. So I asked the board and elders, why don't we incorporate what is the preamble into what is the affirmation of faith? Now, I got that from Ronald Osborne's book, The Faith We Affirm, which I later used as a teaching tool to the whole congregation and to my elders and to the board. I think this works. This is the faith we affirm. This is who we are as disciples. So beginning, I think the spring of 1978, until I retired October 23rd, 2016, every Sunday at Loudon Christian Church, we recited together the preamble, which is the affirmation of faith. So I decided, well, this may be the best way to do catechism. So we would recite it, but each month I would take a section and said, I think this is what this means. So that the congregation didn't just recite it, it became what we believe. It became our marching orders. And so if you come into Loudon Avenue now, at least they tell me they're still doing the affirmation of faith, and I've been gone, be 3 years next month. It's a marvelous way for me and for the church to almost crystallize. This is what we believe as church, especially covenant. That became the word for me. We're a covenant church. There's a larger church than Loudon Avenue. So I started looking again at the design and said, okay, part of being covenant is that there are certain manifestations of the church. So I said there's a general church, regional church, and then Loudon as a local church. And then I said, no, we have other entities, because we had, for us, the Piedmont District Convention, which is a black convention, and then we had District 3. So I said, we have to be part of all of this if we're going to be in covenant. And they said, well, Pastor, you keep saying covenant. I said, well, let's go back to the New Testament. Let's go back to communion. Let's go back to Passover. Remember, Jesus said, a new covenant I make with you. So this covenant of love that God has built with us through the blood of his son is the covenant that we celebrate. But it's not just a local church covenant. It's a covenant that we celebrate from Roanoke all the way to Indianapolis to Canada and all over the world. And so they kind of bought that. They kind of said, that's cool. It somehow made things cohesive for us. We had a good talking point. When new people would come to the church, I didn't have to start over. The congregation could tell them, say, well, what do you believe as a Christian church? And they would say, here's our affirmation of faith. They'd go right through it, which was a wonderful thing. That was the easy part. So we're reciting it and we're learning it. But you got to go from catechism to praxis. How do you put it into practice? The first place I saw it was in building the budget. I said to the congregation, to the finance committee, there are certain things must be in the budget if we're going to be in covenant, because the general church cannot function unless the local church support it. I said, Pastor, what does that mean? I said, well, for me, one, pastor needs to be able to go to General Assembly and to other church functions, so I represent not just you, but we're part of the whole church. And so there's a line item in the budget to this day for the pastor to go to General Assembly, all expenses paid, and on the off year for the National Convocation, all expenses paid, because we want you engaged in that. But I said, that's not enough. I said, I want many of you, as many as you can afford, to go with me, because if you see the larger church at work, then you'll understand it's not me coming back reporting what I see, it's what you see with me. So we put in the budget based on the formula said that with our active membership, I think we had 7 delegates that could go as voting delegates to the General Assembly. So we budgeted registration for 7 delegates. And best of my memory, every year that there was a General Assembly, there was always at least 7 to 10 members of Loudon Avenue that went to General Assembly all over the place. And the folk got used to the fact that this is what we do. We go to General Assembly. In the years we didn't go to General Assembly, went to National Convocation. But the church paid registration and sometimes helped others who didn't have sufficient funding for housing, etc. But we've always fixed it so 2 people in a room. If the General Assembly was close by, we would take the church bus, transport people. But we wanted people there. I wanted the people of Loudon to enjoy and participate in the whole church. So also Regional Assembly, we don't miss Regional Assembly. It's strange, we never took as many to Regional Assembly as we took to General Assembly, but always part of that and part of District 3. We had an interesting thing with District 3. To fund District 3, each congregation was tasked to give $1 for every active member. Loudon was the largest church in our district. I can remember the figure now precisely. We were saying we had an active membership of 600, so we had to pay $600 every year to District 3. Now this is not what we paid in missions. This was District 3. And I remember someone saying to me, Pastor, why are we paying this money? I said, we're in covenant. We promised that we would support the district, Piedmont, the region, and the general church. And we can't do that just with voice. We have to do that also with finances. But not just with finances. We have to also do it with human presence. So when I say we need to go, to be in covenant, we have to go. And so we talked constantly about covenant, what it means to be in covenant. So one of the blessed ways that we do it at communion, I remind our members, we make sure on just before communion, I then will go back over a section of the affirmation of faith. God's love binds us. And at this table, we are bound No one has to make us. No one has to force us. No one has to twist our arms. We do this because we love God. We love each other. We love our church. And so that has worked well throughout my ministry. That part was in the budget. Then I said we need to go a step further. The church asked each of us to support basic mission finance, mission funding. And we need a formula. The church needs to know that Loudoun is going to give a certain amount every year. So we came up with what we thought was fair and equitable for us. We put it in the budget. That was a big step for us. And then we did every special day offering. I would write a letter to the congregation explaining the special day offering, why we did it. So if it had anything to do with higher education, I listed every institution that was affiliated with us. If it was Week of Compassion, we'll let them know all the things Week of Compassion would do, all of the blurbs that come out. Thanksgiving, Easter, and Christmas. We did that every year, but not before the letter preceded it, and then pushing them when we had a website. Then I would push them, you can go to the Disciple website and see these things yourself in more detail. So at our church, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, they know that part of covenant is that we participate in these offerings, and then on top of that we give our basic mission money. It has worked wonderfully well for us. So the church knows that there's a church beyond Roanoke. There's a larger church. So one of the most interesting happened to me. You stay at church a long time. You go through these changes. So in a board meeting, one of the newer members said, "Pastor, I need to know what is our return on investment for all this money we're giving away." I had never heard anybody ask for return on investment in church. But fortunately, because I try to stay attuned to the church, I could quickly say, let me walk you through some stuff. I said, you hear me talk about the fact that I have standing. And so let me explain that further for you. Standing is the gold star, it's a seal of approval, such as a lawyer passing the bar, the doctor passing his medical stuff, and there's an entity that says, this person is fit to do their work. I said the General Church in Indianapolis, through DHM, says that you have a pastor who is fit to be a disciple pastor. We stand behind Bill Lee. He is credentialed. I said, that's a big deal. They said, oh. I said, now, y'all pay every quarter my pension to the pension fund, which means that at the time I come to retirement, I have a retirement pension. That's a benefit. That's part of covenant. The church says that if you do that, they will guarantee that when I get to retirement age, that your pastor can retire and you don't have to worry about whether y'all were equitable and fair with me. I have a pension. He said, wow. I said, let me tell you something else about that. If I'm disabled, you don't have to worry. I'm taken care of by the pension fund. And then I shared with them that our secretary had gone out on disability twice during my tenure, and that the pension fund paid her pension. The church did not have to pay that while she was out. She got disability. We were able to hire someone else for that 6-month period, and it didn't disrupt the church's budget one bit. I said, that's tremendous benefit. I said, you see the chalice on the cross, the St. Andrew's cross? They said, yes. I said, that's like the church saying, this is your brand. You can use our brand. So everybody will know when they pass by Loudoun Avenue Christian Church, you're part of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, United States and Canada. I said, it's like marketing. They said, wow. I said, yeah. I said, that's what it's all about. It's covenant. I said, it's not what we just give away, but what we get in return. And what we get in return is far more than what we actually give. So I said, let me remind all of you of the flood of '85. You remember I came to the pulpit and I said to the congregation I needed to spend about 5 to 10 minutes talking about the flood and those members of our church who have been impacted. I said I won't give names, but a lot of people were impacted. They lost refrigerators, freezers, they lost food, they lost furniture. I said, I have in my hand, because I had not given them to the finance secretary, 2 checks that have come from Week of Compassion. Johnny Ray called me the day of the flood. They knew the name Johnny Ray, because those are conversations that we had. I said, the Week of Compassion did not wait. Johnny called, he said that grants are in the mail, Bill. You use these checks and money as best you know how to help your folk. I said, what I'm going to do is to have this treasurer deposit this money in our benevolence account, and X number of persons who said they've been affected will receive these grants to help them replenish some things they lost. I said, that's what a covenant church does. I said, now, many of you won't know Johnny Ray if you saw him, but you know Week of Compassion. And you see how compassionate they are to us. I said, that happens all over the country. Every time there's a disaster, this happens. I said, but here's the key for us. I asked you to participate in the Week of Compassion offering before there is a disaster, because we have to have accumulated funds so that whenever something happens, it's done. I said, okay, so some of you got upset with me last week because you wanted to participate, because locally they were getting a truckload of water and things to go to, there was Katrina. I said you could participate, but I would not be doing a special drive. And I explained to you why. I said, we are already there. Our staff is on the ground, boots on the ground. Plus, with the other agencies that we partner with, blankets are there, water is there, housing is there. We're working through FEMA. We're doing all of this stuff because you contribute. That's part of covenant. And they said, of course, folks stood up and applauded and said, oh my goodness. I said, I'm just telling you, that's what covenant looks like. When you work with a church like this, it's absolutely wonderful. And that's been my experience. I just think covenant is the way. No one twists your arm, nobody forces you. This is a volunteer thing on our part. It's a love act. It's what covenant is. No one is going to take anything from us if we don't. But I assure you, we'll miss out on a great deal if we don't participate. So that's why we are engaged in covenant. It's a marvelous way to do church. Many of you knew that in 2007, I was in Fort Worth. I was the moderator of the church. Many of you remember that 2-year period I was gone a lot. Some of y'all fussed a little bit because I was gone. But I stood in the pulpit and explained to you, as part of being in covenant, it's not just our money. I thought, and many of you were proud of the fact that the church thought enough of your past to call me to be moderator for 2 years. That's part of covenant. I said, now, you do know that the church got a lot of free publicity with your pastor being moderator. It's covenant. And to be in covenant means that you have to give of yourself. The return is greater, but if we didn't get anything in return, part of being in covenant is for us to make those kind of sacrificial gifts. It's been a thrill for me. That's what covenant has done for me. Now, I'm slightly crazy. I thought every Christian church in the country was doing what we were doing. I thought it was absolutely a natural thing that every pastor was telling their congregations, we're a covenant church. I have certain things I just think the church, every pastor ought to do. I think every pastor ought to come to General Assembly, not because you have to, you want to. Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail has that marvelous line when he says that we are, in essence, a single garment tied together into a single state of destiny. This is what it is. We are together moving to some sense of destiny. That's me. That's what I think covenant is. So Bill Lee should be a General Assembly. No one has to make me. Now, I must be honest, something did happen in my life early on that helped me make sure I go to General Assembly. I missed the Anaheim Assembly. And this is where I saw covenant really work for me. I had my ticket, I was registered, but had an accident in my house. My neighbor's car came off the bank and hit my house, so I stayed to get my house in repair. The week after the assembly, I received a letter from Dr. John Humbert, General Minister and President, saying, Bill, I write this letter of concern. I want you to know that you're out of covenant because you did not attend the General Assembly. I said, oh, Lord. Now, I hadn't been pastoring about 8 years. I'm still getting my feet wet, and already I'm dinged. I'm out of covenant. So I met with the elders. I said, I'm out of covenant. I got a letter from the General Minister and President. The General Minister and President wrote me a letter. I said, what am I going to do? And they said, well, Pastor, just call him. So I called John the next day. I'll never forget that laugh. Matter of fact, we had lunch together in Des Moines, which is interesting. John started laughing. He said, you remember that phone call? I said, it wasn't the phone call, John. It was the letter. He said, yeah, that too. And when I spoke to John, he was just laughing. I said, John, I apologize. I'll never do it again. I'll never miss another assembly. Please, I don't want to be out of covenant. Can you fix it? And he said, Bill, I don't have that kind of authority. He said, but I did get your attention, didn't I? And I thought, what would it be like in our church if the General Minister and President had the resources, every regional minister would write their pastors and say, well, prior to the assembly, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the assembly. I pray that your churches have made provisions, etc. But if they don't make it, not punitive, not putting them down, but simply writing a letter of concern, saying, we miss you because you're a major part of the tapestry of this church. And we pray that all is well with your life, but wanted you to know from us, the regional ministers, the General Minister and President, we miss you. That's what I was frightened at first when John sent me that letter, but I thought, you mean to tell me somebody realized I wasn't at the General Assembly? All those folk, all those ministers, and they realized that Bill Lee wasn't there. That was a big, big piece for me. So I got a couple of things before I finish it. I think that I would hope that every church would consider, and every pastor. Number one, I think we ought to have an annual day for every pastor to renew their covenant with the church. Again, this is not forced. This is not part of the Episcopal said nobody's making you do it. I just think that in our own moral determination, that I ought to sign somewhere and say, I am a pastor in good standing, the Christian Disciple of Christ, and I am still bound by the covenant of love that God has bound us together. That's all. It says to me, and it says to the church, Bill Lee is still in this thing with you. Then I would like for every congregation to do that. Now, I think everybody should go through that preamble, look at it and say, I believe this. I still believe that this is real. I think this is the way to be. This is a covenantal church, and so I'm going to do it because that's what I want to do. And churches sign off and say, as a church, we are in covenant with the Christian Church Disciple of Christ, and we're going to be a covenantal church. We're going to do those things that help us become stronger. So let me say this in finality. I have a dear friend who was a district superintendent at the Methodist Church. I went to charge conference with him on several occasions, and he scared me to death. The way he talked to the people, the discipline, that was the word, the discipline requires you to do these crowds. And I left those meetings. As a matter of fact, I called for a recess. I'm just a guest. I said, can we go outside and talk? And I said, why you act like that? He said, well, these folk are not following the discipline. And I've been nice to them, but now I got to bring the hammer down. I said, but you sound cruel. He said, Bill, it's not cruel. These folk need to understand they got to pay their claims. They got to do it. I said, wow. He said, y'all don't do this? I said, no, we're a covenant church. And y'all stay in business? I said, yeah, we stay in business because we got enough people who believe that you don't have to cuss us out or beat us up, that we will do what is right by the church because we're a covenant church. So for me, I don't want a bishop. I don't want a pope. I don't want anybody strong-arming me, but because of covenant, because of the blood of Christ that runs through my life and the lives of those whom I love, Bill Lee will be in covenant. And if I ever pastor again, the church where I pastor will know the affirmation of faith, the preamble, and we'll be in covenant together. Thank you. I think I might have come close.